I'm the president. I won't talk on the radio when I'm the president. Oh, when I'm the president.
When I'm the president, I'll show you how I'll run the house when I'm the president. What this country is in need of is a lot of hidey-ho, boop-a-doops and chocolate ice cream.
We say yes.
And we say no.
Now we will give things for nothing, movies, cabarets, and jazz.
We accept it.
We reject it.
You're an elephant.
You're an ass.
Yeah.
You have heard all my suggestions, and with me you all agree. Now we'll have a perfect country. These improvements you will see.
If only life were as simple as a Max Fleischer cartoon, Betty Boop would definitely get my vote, but unfortunately it isn't. And on tonight's edition of the movie program, and on the eve of the 2008 election, that's our focus. Not only, you may be sick of the campaign up to this point, but hopefully tonight we'll be discussing some great films that will look at the political process. A good thing to talk about prior to the election, and perhaps maybe there's nothing new under the sun in American politics. And to have this invigorating discussion with me, it's my very good friend right across the aisle. It's Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, the undeniable, unrefutable, and totally electable King Vidor Award-winning czar of film on the Central Coast. Of course, we're talking about your friend, and a man I'm proud to call my friend, Jim Dee.
Great to see you, Bob. And before we hit our political discussion tonight, I think you want to...
Well, I want to take a moment to talk to everyone out there in Radio Land, address the movie lovers and fans of Take-Two. As you probably are aware, we have not been on the air live for, I'd say, a little over a month, and I just want you to know out there that I'm back. I'm going to be doing the show. I know a lot of you are concerned. My business, Insomniac Video, closed. I was involved deeply the last month in working to bring it to a successful conclusion. It's been a good run, 11 years. A lot of laughter, a lot of tears, a lot of profound moments. I want to thank everyone who came by to buy a movie or just to, shake hands, offer their condolences. It's been a nice run, and I'm very grateful to everybody. I apologize to some of you out there that I wasn't maybe a happier guy when you came by. It's not easy doing something like this, but it's done now. And Insomniac will go down, I think, in our local history anyway, as a positive institution. We had a great time, a lot of laughs, and I got to say, even though the economy went bad and we were a victim, I refuse to be a victim. I will continue to be out there. This burg hasn't seen the last of me. We'll be doing the show, and I think we're going to continue to have a good time together here every Monday on Take-Two. So thanks, everybody, for your support down the years. Thanks for your kind words when they mattered most these last few weeks, which have been very trying for me, and I know for a lot of you out there. But hey, it helped establish the beachhead. We're here, and we're going to keep going forward.
Well, one thing I would like to say to our listeners and to Bob right here in the KCBX screening room is, of course, we're on public radio, and excuse me, we usually, we don't talk about our businesses because it's not a commercial radio station. But now that Insomniac Video is a chapter in the past. I do want to say how much Bob's store and collection made this show what it is. I mean, I think we have a great time discussing movies, and we've talked, our listeners tell us they enjoy hearing us yak about movies. But it's the clips that you hear each and every week that we got from Bob's incredible treasure trove of films. And so we've got some of that still surviving after Insomniac's going into the ether, let's say it can return at some point. But
it's just faded to black right now, Jimmy.
But this show wouldn't be what it was without Bob's incredible collection of films. And so I'm extremely grateful for Bob's collection and for staying alive for 11 years, was it? And a big part of the show. And but we're, as Bob said, we're going to forge on ahead and being here each week on Take Two, the movie program, and for you, the listeners. And we thank you for being there as well.
You know, and I just want to make a very brief statement as well. It's like I want to thank Blue Lou Oliveira, who worked with me right to the bitter end. I want to say thanks to young Bryce DVD Wilson, who wrote a wonderful piece in New Times eulogizing the store. He used to work for us. Kai Roth, definitely one of the great lovers of exploitation. Bobby Thayer, James Posca. Oh, my goodness. There's an endless list. Young Erin O'Farrell. Later on, her brother, Little Timmy O'Farrell. Todd Young, also known as Todd. And my partner, John. We had a great time, a great run, and thanks to all of them for making it memorable right up until... Oh, and I might mention, too, Stevie A. He's a big part of the Insomniac's behind-the-scenes scene. Thanks to all of you.
And I thank you, Bob.
And I thank you, Jimmy. Because without you in the palm, we never could have even attempted this to begin with. And, you know, at the end of the day, technology, Netflix, and the worst economy since the Great Depression is what did us in. And I sit here today not as a failure, but as someone who is very proud of what I've been able to achieve.
Fantastic. And the pendulum will swing back. I think it's swung one way. It should swing back the other way. Well, folks, here we are on the eve of one of the most important and most, shall we say, controversial, let's just call it long-running campaigns, the day before the 2008 presidential election. And we here at the movie program, can call upon some amazing films that have withstood the test of time, but also looking at politics not only in an entertaining but an informative way. And again, Bob, as we watch this campaign that seemed to be so long-running, there's elements that we see in movies that have been made 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and giving our listeners an insight. Perhaps after tomorrow, the last thing you would want to see is a movie on politics, but they're out there, and I do think that they lend some great insight into what's happening, what we see on our television sets each night as we come up to the big day tomorrow, Tuesday, November the 4th.
Well, Jimmy, elections and media always seem to go hand in hand. Back in the old days, it's the newspaper, and now, like movies, television, the films we're talking about, they're older films. We've talked about them before. But as film lovers, and you and I love movies, it's always good to go back to a tried and true when, you're facing these, like you said, this is a critical and pivotal election in our country's history. And I know everybody, irregardless of their political stripe, there's a lot of anxiety out there. I think that's one thing we can all agree upon. And when I think of Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, there's a film that was made during a time when America was in the throes of a Great Depression, when it seemed like we wouldn't be able to get out of this because we had to rely on politicians who were very much, well, a lot of them were responsible for the mess we were in then, kind of like what we are now. And it took a filmmaker like Frank Capra. Now, Capra, he was an optimist, but he always wasn't afraid to point the finger at corruption and the bad side of human character, and he'd always counterbalance it with the people. In other words, in this film, Claude Rains, who I gotta say, Claude Rains could be swarmy and suave with one breath, kind of like Peter Ustinov.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this today. It's like, gosh, where are these kind of actors today, where they can repel you and charm you all at the same time? And I think he was a perfect choice as, one of the bad guys. Edward Arnold, always good as a corrupt political boss. But Capra in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, incidentally, the only American film I can think of that the German and Japanese fascists in the 30s didn't ban from showing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I found that. I read that little tidbit somewhere years ago, and I found that really interesting. I mean, you could think of all the ones. Apparently, they didn't like a lot of the Busby Berkeley stuff, but who knows? These brown shirts, Well,
we're talking about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, a must-see for all Americans, and, hey, tonight, watch it. If you can get a hold of it, it'll prep you for the election tomorrow. And also, as Bob said, Frank Capra showing both sides of the political spectrum, from the most corrupt to the most inspiring and engaging. And here's a clip from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, sort of giving you an idea that perhaps the politicians themselves are not the ones pulling the strings.
In considering the candidates who might answer to the high qualifications of United States Senator, there was one name that shone out like a beacon, the Honorable Horace Miller.
No!
Party man, he's Taylor's stooge.
The veterans shall have no part of him.
The New Citizens Committee won't stand for it.
So, they named their own candidate, eh? Who? You won't like him, Jim. Come on, who? Henry Hill. Henry Hill? That crackpot, that long head? Why, you should have killed that so fast. I couldn't, Jim. I couldn't. Those men... Never mind what they were. You forget about them, see? Jim, that bunch is out for blood. If I throw Horace in their teeth
I said forget about him. Horace Miller goes to the Senate, and that settles it.
I won't send Horace Miller. Oh, you won't? No, I won't. I won't let you stand there callously and perhaps wreck my whole political future.
Your political future? Why, I bought it for you. I gave it to you as a present, and I can grab it back so fast it'll make your head swim. You've got a nerve to sit there and worry about your political future when we're in a spot like this. The man is Miller.
It's a scene from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, directed by Frank Capra, and there you have it. I mean, sometimes you have to wonder in elections in this country where money talks, who's providing the money, and therefore the, shall we say, the direction of a political campaign obviously is steered not perhaps by the person in the forefront, but the person who is providing the money in those smoky rooms behind the scenes.
And juxtapose that with a very young, idealistic Jimmy Stewart on the other side. I mean, I think Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, more than any film he did before World War II, really captures that kind of, I don't know, he's just so wonderful in this. He's almost too wonderful to be true, but he's the kind of guy you want to root for. And sure, he's innocent, and he's a bit of a hayseed, but why not? I mean, he wants to just hold the country up to the ideals that they all talk about. And he captures the imagination of the people. I often think of this film in relation to Meet John Doe, which was also a Capra film with Gary Cooper. And that was his film dealing with fascism, American style. Not exactly love American style, but that's also definitely something to check out.
We're talking about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. If you haven't seen it recently, do check it out, perhaps before the election and even after the election. We're also talking about the element of money in elections, and we're going to talk about a film that isn't really a political film per se. We're talking about the great Key Largo, directed by John Huston, and this is post-World War II. And we have Humphrey Bogart, along with Edward G. Robinson, sort of reprising his role as a gangster, but some of the script was brought out after the 2000 election, where those votes in Florida were counted and counted and counted, and of course we had the result with Bush being a selected president by the Supreme Court. But we just wanted to play you this clip. Again, the undercurrent, the elements that drive an election, and in this case, Edward G. Robinson talking about, well, how he has made politicians. This is Edward G. Robinson in Key Largo.
So I won't get away with it, huh? How many times I heard that from dumb coppers I couldn't count. I still say it. You gave your left eye to nail me, wouldn't you, huh? You can see the headlines, can't you? Local deputy captured Johnny Rocco. Your picture had been in all the papers. You might even get to tell on the newsreel how you pulled it off. Yeah. Well, listen, Hick. I was too much for any big city police force to handle. They tried, but they couldn't. Took the United States government to pin a rap on me. Yeah, and they won't make it stick. You hick. I'll be back pulling strings to get guys elected mayor and governor before you ever get a $10 raise. Yeah. How many of those guys in office owe everything to me? I made them. Yeah, I made them just like a tailor makes a suit of clothes. I take a nobody, see? Teach him what to say. Get his name in the papers. Yeah, pay for his campaign expenses. Dish out a lot of groceries and coal. Get my boys to bring the voters out. And then count the votes over and over again till they added up right and he was elected. Yeah. And what happened? Did you remember when the going got tough? When the heat was on? No, he didn't want to. All he wanted was to save his own dirty neck. Yeah, that's enough of that. Give me a towel, will you? Yeah. Public enemy, he calls me. Me, who gave him his public, all wrapped up with a fancy bow on it. Angel, lay my clothes out.
What suit?
A gray one.
What color shirt?
That's a scene from Key Largo, the great Edward G. Robinson, telling it like it is, the way politics really are. It's the boss behind the scenes with the big cigar who is really pulling the strings.
And you know, Jimmy, this film, I think, is essential election day viewing. And it will always be synonymous with, as you had mentioned earlier, the 2000 election. And the fact that Richard Brooks, who wrote it, John Huston, who directed it, and Edward G. Robinson, who went on and delivered these lines, it was, I mean, what a poignant and, I mean, wow. Mind blow. I mean, it could easily ended up in Uncounted, the film that came out recently with Kevin Spacey. Or I'm sorry, Recount, which I believe was the last Sidney Pollack production.
That's
on
right.
HBO, which is, I mean, I could see their characters saying that easily. And I think that film, and especially that bit, should always be out there for folks who need to be reminded that elections can be stolen.
You know, and just the fact that Humphrey Bogart is in this film, and it was just, about 5-6 years earlier that he starred in Casablanca with much more hope. I mean, even though Rick at his Rick's Cafe Americain, who is kind of deluded and not wanting to be the hero, of course, because of his lost love. But there's so much more hope in Casablanca as opposed to Key Largo, where things are a little bit more skewed. It's post-World War II, and you realize these gangsters are pulling the strings, and it's a little less hopeful, I think. There's a not a quantum leap, but there's sort of a shift that occurs over that course of like 1940 to the point where we're at now with Key Largo, where the heroes aren't so clearly drawn.
Well, I think this is a major element to film noir, which became very big. It started probably before World War II, but it really got up and ran after World War II. I mean, when I see this film, Jimmy, I agree. There's something up with Bogey's character. The country's lost its innocence. They fought and they bled for ideals to beat a vicious enemy. And they come home and they still see bigotry. They still see some of the things that maybe more clearly that they fought against. Even more so than what they fought for. And this film, I think, really captures that feeling. I mean, you're talking about people like John Huston, who was over there and saw it. Richard Brooks, a Marine, he'd been in it. And, oh dear, here I go with that. Folks, I'm just a little out of practice here. Believe me, it'll get better.
I think we're talking about a major loss of innocence here.
Yes, that is correct. And, you juxtapose a tin pot dictator with a cigar chomping gangster, and there you go.
Yes.
And again, he's grinding the heel of his patent leather Italian custom-made shoe into the face of the little guy.
There you
and
go.
It's always the same. It's always the little guys that have to stand up and fight the big guys.
Well, having said that, we just talked about John Huston's great Key Largo with Edward G. Robinson and Humphrey Bogart. But now we're going to segue into another film where that undercurrent is still there, and we're talking about the wonderfully entertaining Born Yesterday with William Holden, Broderick Crawford, and the wonderful Judy Holliday, who left us way too early. But again, in this film, Born Yesterday, politics, corrupt is the sort of the undercurrent. And when you talk about the little guy, we're talking about William Holden, who is, I guess, a journalist in this film, who is trying to stick up for the principles of America and, going right into the face of the corrupt politician who is fabulously played by Broderick Crawford. I mean, what a voice this guy had, but what a blustering, blistering politician he is in this great film.
And, this is kind of interesting, Jimmy, because this film came on the heels of Broderick Crawford's tour de force performance, All the King's Men, the original one. And here he kind of takes the same character and plays him a little dumber and a little bit more for laughs, yet the message resonates just the same. And I'd highly recommend this, Born Yesterday, and I'd highly recommend checking out the original All the King's Men as well, because Broderick Crawford, when he came out of the gate, this is pre-Highway Patrol, and younger members of the audience just go along with me for a minute here, because you're not even going to find that on TV land. It's that old. But boy, he came out of the gate with some great roles, and this is one of them.
This doesn't need much introduction. This is William Holden, Broderick Crawford, and Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday.
What if I told you this whole operation is strictly according to law?
Then I'd say the law needs revision.
Who are you, the government?
Of course.
Since when?
Since 1779, right?
Right. What do you think you've got, Paul?
A connection between Harry's Combine and the Congressman's amendment.
All right, but why single us out to make a fuss over it?
Yeah, why?
What we're doing isn't uncommon. It's done every day.
Done every day, that's right. For all I know, there's an undiscovered murder committed every day. And what does that prove?
All this undercover pressure, this bribery, corruption, government between friends. Sure, it goes on all the time and it's tough to crack. Just ask me, I've tried for years. You need more than knowing about it. You gotta have facts and figures. And most important, the names.
He's got him.
All right, let's get down to it. What'll you take, Paul?
I'll take a drink, please, if I may.
Don't get fancy with me. I ain't met a guy yet didn't have his price.
I have.
I'm talking about big numbers.
You and your big numbers. You know what, Shaw? You be wearing one across your chest.
I'll get to you later.
I think, Bob, when Broderick Crawford would talk, he could just talk in the lowest voice and he still sound like he was yelling, you know. But what an entertaining, great film, Born Yesterday. And, of course, you get that political undercurrent that really looks at it straight and, true with what's really going on here underneath the surface.
It's kind of the old school corruption. You know, I often kind of get nostalgic for the old days. Like, you know, if I'm going to have corruption, I want my guys to be like, you know, big, tough, big fingers, flat top, haircuts. So it looked like someone dropped an anvil on their head and throwing guys in cement mixes. I don't know. Things must have gotten bad in this country when you look back upon that kind of stuff with nostalgia. But, yeah, I don't know.
I'm trying to think of how we can relate this to the current election, although, you know, even though there are some new aspects of the 2008 election that maybe we wouldn't find in some of these older films, I'm sure there's those backroom deals and, of course, in the guiding of certain policies and so on that perhaps we'll see after tomorrow. But
and smearing the other guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've seen that. We have seen that this year. So, you know, before the word spin got its current definition, I think we saw spin in lots of these movies that we're talking about on tonight's program. And we're going to go to The Last Hurrah, which is a wonderful film of politics, and the wonderful Spencer Tracy and Pat O'Brien are in this film. And it's sort of the last hurrah of this older politician who's doing, you know, going by the numbers, and really for an election time, a great film to pull out and watch.
Well, this film, it's John Ford, and people who listen to this show know how much we revere John Ford, the filmmaker, and The Last Hurrah kind of says it all. It's like the old machine politicians. They're all getting on in years. And this is the last go-around. And Spencer Tracy is, as always, wonderful in this. And he's ably backed up by people like Pat O'Brien, who's always wonderful, Jeffrey Hunter, and, oh, forget it. I can't even name them all. There's so many. And what you have here, it's almost like, Jim, I view this film, it's almost like a love letter to machine politics as it's coming to an end. You know, because the big cities, especially back east, all had their Tammany halls and their big, corrupt, firmly entrenched political machines that ran everything. I'm sure it's not like that anymore. I'm sure it's gotten a facelift, but, you know, and those were the kind of politicians, you could always touch them up for a cigar or a couple of bucks to get a beer or whatever, and they knew they could count on your vote. And this film is a loving homage to it. The Last Hurrah came out in 1958.
Well, you know, Bob, I think what we're going to do is we'll play this clip from Last Hurrah with this kind of a version of Spin, and then we're going to talk about, you know, the new incarnation of Spin after we take our break. So right now, here's a clip from The Last Hurrah where shall we call it a memorial or a funeral is being turned into a political event. This is from The Last Hurrah.
Adam! Thinking of getting a bit of fish air? I'll join you. I know it's none of my business, but you'd be making a mistake to run off like that.
Why? Because it might be disrespectful to the deceased. So what do you call this thing anyway? This isn't a wake, it's a political meeting.
Oh, no. It's It's only natural. After all, there is an election coming up.
Well, maybe so, but, you know, this is Naco Menahan's wake, and you'd think he'd at least figure in the conversation. Besides, people standing around saying, oh, doesn't Naco look grand?
Well, it would be the pious thing to do, no doubt. But if you knew Naco, well, the less said, the better.
Well, he's all that unpopular, then why the turnout?
Well, now, they're here, the most of them, for the same reason as yourself.
Well, I know. I'm here because my uncle brought me here.
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
You mean it's Naco's wake, but it's really my uncle who's the main attraction?
It is.
Yeah, all right. I was right. This is a political meeting. It's just another way of getting votes and using that poor guy's casket as a speaker's platform.
You have things a bit twisty, if you don't mind my saying so, and you're being a bit hard on your uncle.
I don't think so.
Sure, he doesn't have to go to wakes to collect a crowd about him. All he has to do is stop at any street corner and light a cigar, and 50 people come out of the cement and say, how are you, Frank? What can you do for me today? And it's for votes. Sure, there's not a man or woman in that house whose vote he hasn't had in his pocket these last 20 years.
All right, if that's true, then why all this?
Well, I'll tell you. Your uncle came here tonight for only one reason. He came to Naco's wake so the widow would feel a little better, thinking about all the friends her husband had. Oh, I'll admit that politics is, well, it's not the most diplomatic thing to discuss. But if it wasn't that, it'd be sports or the high cost of living or something else. Now, you wouldn't want a room full of men to go on talking indefinitely about what a terrible thing death is, now would you?
No, I suppose not.
Good evening, Monsignor.
That is a scene from The Last Hurrah. And Bob, I just love the word that Pat O'Brien used in that is getting a little bit twisty. You're getting kind of twisty here. Kind of like, you know, here is a shameless taking advantage of a man's funeral, essentially, for political, purposes. But, you know, Pat O'Brien sort of looks at it like, hey, this politician is going to come and make the wife feel better, and gee, see how many friends he had. You know, it's just like taking one way of looking at it. The spin is a shameless taking advantage of this situation. On the other hand, it's making the wife feel better, you know.
And the way he uses the word twisty, he's using it against Jeffrey Hunter, who's calling it for what it really is.
Yeah.
And basically he's accusing him of twisting the facts, when in reality he's telling it straight.
Oh, there's no twisting in politics, is there?
No, of course not.
You're in tune with Take Two, the movie program on public radio, KCBX and KCBX HD1 San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara. We're streaming worldwide at kcbx.org. More political movies in a moment.
You're listening to Take Two on public radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara, streaming at kcbx.org, and you can write to us at movies@kcbx.org.
Support for KCBX comes from the Paso Robles Digital Film Festival, running November 20th through the 25th. The festival features classic films and music documentaries shown in a rotating schedule. Complete festival information at PasoRoblesFilmFestival.com.
Support for the show also comes from Cook Well with Courtney, working in your home to teach whole foods, nutrition, and delicious cooking for the balance of mind and body. More at cookwell.org.
We're back on Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio KCBX. My name is Jim Dee, and I'm here with my good friend Bob Whiteford on the eve of the 2008 presidential election and talking about some films that will make politics palatable, more understandable, and entertaining on tonight's show. And what we want to do, we just talked about the last hurrah and that whole spin thing we've come to know in politics. But there was a film out directed by Barry Levinson starring Robert De Niro that talked about spin itself. And we're talking about the film Wag the Dog. Again, an insight into politics as spin itself, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, this film is all about spin. It's on the spin cycle from the first reel to the last. And I believe it's somewhat cynical, but it's essentially going after the spin doctors. And it's about the spin doctors. And you've got Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman in really good parts here. And it's a film that it's about perception. I mean, if we went back to the last clip, it's what is spin? It's about how you want to sell something. It's like Eisenhower in 1952 when they ran the first television ads. He said, "Sounds to me like you're selling toothpaste," to the ad men who showed him his spots, and they said, "It's exactly what we're doing."
Well, Bob, I didn't tell you this, but for our clips tonight, I almost brought in one of the essential spins, or should we say use of the media, and that was our boy Richard Nixon back in 1951 with the famous Checkers speech.
"Why didn't you bring it in, Jim? I'll tell you, this Frost-Nixon thing has really got me upset. Ron Howard, that little twerp."
I was listening to some of this, Bob, and I was almost going to bring it for our listeners. You can look up the Checkers speech probably on YouTube or somewhere on the internet. But again, here's Richard Nixon putting a spin on his political career that was taking a nosedive. And my gosh, when he was talking about Checkers, his little dog, as opposed to the fact that Pat didn't have a mink coat.
But a good cloth Republican coat. I mean, it was shameless, and America fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And I think, as is often the case with Tricky Dick, a man of vision. He seemed to know how to pander to the absolute worst in the American populace. And, I think this is where Wag the Dog is kind of, that's kind of the exclamation point at the end of it. It's an interesting film. Certainly at the time it was made, that's when Bill Clinton was involved in the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and there was a war in Serbia with the over Kosovo around the same time. So is film reflecting reality or reality following the lead of the film? Everything seemed to get a little blurred right about that time.
And Bob, we were talking before going on the air tonight, and the fact that the 2008 election had, well, one thing was absent. There wasn't a juicy sexual impropriety, it seemed, as opposed to some of the things we're going to be talking about in Wag the Dog here. Seemed
Jim,
darn.
I feel very ripped off. I need a sexual scandal of some sort.
Yeah, this we could say the 2008 election, if it didn't have something, it didn't have one of those. Of course, we still have a day to go, right?
There's still hope.
Here is a couple of scenes from the film Wag the Dog with Robert De Niro. Is our what do we call him? Damage control. When something comes out bad against a political candidate, well, you've got your damage control guy or your spin guy sitting there waiting to pounce or to repounce on the dirty shenanigans that go on a political campaign. Here is a scene from Wag the Dog.
Another sort of news, however, has emerged from the presidential quarter. We turn to Melissa Gardner at KZAB in Santa Fe with this breaking news. Melissa?
Thanks, Richard. Today, a local Firefly girl accused the president of sexual misconduct. This photo of the president with the girls was taken during their recent tour of the White House. The girl claims that the sexual misconduct occurred inside the Oval Office. Her attorney says there are no plans yet to hold a press conference. Right now, folks in Santa Fe and the rest of America are waiting for a response from the White House on these harsh allegations. With the election only days away, the big question is, how much will this scandal affect the outcome?
What is it? It's the campaign commercial. Should we look at it?
Yeah, put it in.
Yeah.
Oh, this should be interesting.
What is it?
It's the rough cut, the other side's new commercial.
Oh, the Neil commercial.
Yeah, we had somebody steal it from the editing bay. Turn it up.
This will be on the air the day after tomorrow.
In the final days of the campaign, has the president changed his tune?
Thank heaven for little girl.
The presidency is about honor.
Thank heaven for little girl.
It's about principles.
Without them, what would little boys do?
And it's about integrity.
Thank heaven.
This tune has got to change. On Election Day, vote Neil for president.
Oh, boy. All right, who's going to take the press conference today?
Is there a press conference today?
Well, what do you think? We're going to have to use this as a base of operations. I'm going to need 1 day, 2 days. Whoever's leaking that stuff to that geek at the Post lets it slip. Jeez, I hope this won't screw up the B3 program. What B3 program, and why should it screw it up? Well, if the president decides to deploy the B3 before it's fully tested, deploy the B3 before it's fully tested? Yeah. Why? Why the crisis?
What crisis?
Well, I'm working on that.
Robert De Niro from Wag the Dog, taking care of damage control, and the closest thing in the 2008 election, Bob, I would say, is the association with, shall we say, isms like socialism, or an association with perhaps your radical pastor, or so no sexual shenanigans in the 2008 election, but again, associating the candidates with certain undesirable elements seems to be still here in 2008.
Well, that seemed to reek of me of a little desperation-ism, if you ask me. Or I ain't got nothing to talk about-ism.
There we go. Well, check out Wag the Dog. Of course, maybe after these next 2 days you want to wait a little bit, but again, those inner workings of the political circus, shall we call it, is Wag the Dog is a good one to check out. Now, Bob, I want to go to this great film from the 1960s, and I always refer to it as one of the most telling, great script, and we've got Henry Fonda once again portraying a presidential candidate. Cliff Robertson plays sort of a Nixonian candidate.
Hardball.
Yeah, and this film I keep returning to as having just a great script, a great inner view of politics, and again, they seem sort of universal in the fact that there are things in this movie that were evident in the current election. They just seem to be, as I said, universal in all elections or in American politics. The film is called The Best Man. I highly recommend you seek it out, with Henry Fonda and Cliff Robertson.
Written by Gore Vidal, whose father was a senator. And Gore Vidal still has a really interesting grasp of the American political system. This is a great film because basically the premise of The Best Man is the best man doesn't win. The best man is the guy who gets thrown under the bus, so to speak. In fact, I was thinking about The Best Man this morning, Jim. I've been house sitting, and I actually got to watch some cable television, which is very unusual for me. And I got to watch this film this morning. It was called Mr. Conservative, Goldwater on Goldwater. And it's a documentary about the Republican 1964 presidential candidate Barry Goldwater from Arizona. In fact, John McCain took his Senate seat. And Barry Goldwater was a fascinating guy. It's one of the best things I've seen on a politician in a long time, because you had Al Franken's interviewed, George Will you would expect, but you get all different perspectives. The part of the film I found the most interesting was all the footage of the 1964 Republican convention at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. And I'm watching this, and of course it's all shot in black and white. Now, some of it's shot by members of the Goldwater campaign, some of it's shot by members of the GOP. Some of it is from the news media, and it's all black and white. And I believe, I don't know the name of the filmmaker, and forgive me on that, because I know it was produced by Barry Goldwater's granddaughter. I watched this, and it just, The Best Man came to mind right away. I mean, it's so similar in how it's set up. I mean, they both came out, the footage that I was seeing was from 1964. The Best Man was from 1964. And it was just, this was a presidential campaign I was too young. I was alive, but too young to know anything about. And this is why The Best Man had prepped me. So when I saw this, I saw a lot of this footage for the first time, and I had I was grounded. I kind of understood how it all worked. Not to mention the fact the film is excellent, and Barry Goldwater is, irregardless of your ideological stripe, he's one of the most fascinating political figures this country has ever produced, and I would highly recommend that film as a nice companion piece to The Best Man. Of course, he went on to be defeated in a landslide by Lyndon Johnson in 1964, but that's, afterwards Vietnam and the whole country started to burn up, so we know where that one headed.
So give our listeners the name of the Goldwater documentary once again.
Mr. Conservative, Goldwater on Goldwater. And it also features Barry Goldwater Jr., one of my buddy Scott's, one of his favorite people.
A great one to seek out. I'm just wondering if it is available on video.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So a good companion piece for the film we're talking about now from 1964, The Best Man with Henry Fonda. In this scene, I just listened to the political savvy in this dialogue. In this scene, Henry Fonda, running for the president, is calling upon the sitting president and asking for an endorsement. This is from The Best Man.
Well, son, how do you like politics?
I like it so much I'm beginning to worry.
It's awful, isn't it? It's worse than gambling, I sometimes think. Me, I was hooked when I was no more than this high, and a certain four-flusher by the name of William Jennings Bryan came to town.
You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns.
You shall not crucify mankind upon this cross of gold. Hot damn, that was a speech.
But then Bryan lost the election.
So he did, so he did.
Art, your endorsement's a very important thing to anybody who wants the nomination.
I know it is. So indulgent, old duffer. Getting you fellas to listen to my stories and watching you squirm a bit, waiting to see who I'm going to put my money on. It's just about the only pleasure I've got left.
I'm squirming.
You know, politics has changed a lot since my day. The age of the great Hicks, to which I belong, is all over. You rich boys got it all sewed up.
I didn't know you were a Marxist.
Marxist? Never heard of the word. No. The time was when you rich boys liked to play games like polo. Now you play politics. But I am nothing, not a realist. The people like your sort, they figure since you got so much money of your own, you won't go stealing theirs.
That poor but honest line of Joe Cantwell's doesn't seem to hurt him.
Joe Cantwell. He hadn't got your money, hadn't got your brains either. Matter of fact, very few of us are as bright as you.
Come off it, Art.
No, I mean it. You're a very superior man. Kind we don't often find in politics, while Joe is one of these mediocre boys like me, only smoother, of course.
He is not like you. He'd do anything to win, and that makes him dangerous.
No. I wouldn't go that far. At least, he knows his own mind.
You think I don't?
Well, son, you got such a good mind that sometimes you get so busy thinking how complex everything is that important problems don't get solved.
Look, suppose the Chinese were to attack India. That's the kind of thing you and I understand. I think we could handle it without starting an atomic war or losing India. But what would Joe do? He'd look at the Gallup poll. And what would the Gallup poll tell him? Well, ask any average American you want to run the risk of being blown up to save India. He'd say, hell no. Well, Joe would do the popular thing. He'd say, the hell with India. And we'd be the weaker for it. That day we're all afraid of would be closer.
Son, you've been reading too much of that Joe Alsop fellow. Things are never that bad.
The Best Man from 1964. And, you know, if you enjoy that repartee, that great dialogue, I mean, this whole film written by Gore Vidal is filled with it, and great political insight. And check out The Best Man and the Mr. Conservative, the documentary on Barry Goldwater. And, you know, we're on the subject of Henry Fonda, Bob. I mean, how many times has he portrayed a president? We've talked about Failsafe, where in the 2008 election, we talked about whoever is going to be the next president being tested. Check out Henry Fonda as the president in Failsafe. Of course, you can go the comic route of an atomic annihilation with Peter Sellers as the president in Dr. Strangelove. There's another testing of the American president. And even going back, we were talking about John Ford quite a bit on this program, going back to The Grapes of Wrath, where Henry Fonda is Tom Joad, and sort of those basic American values that are presented in that film. Also a good film to watch during election time. So, you know, looking at the filmography of Henry Fonda, you can get some of those great principles of American politics.
You know, I was just thinking of something while you were talking about that, Jimmy, is a lot of times I think people get the film The Best Man confused with another Henry Fonda political film that came out 2 years before called Advise and Consent, directed by Otto Preminger. And basically, I think in Advise and Consent, Henry Fonda plays a controversial Secretary of State nominee, and you get to see all the mechanisms.
Machination.
Is that
the inner workings?
There you go. Watch the wheels turn on the forces that are pushing his nomination, and subsequently the forces that are fighting to stop his nomination. It was shot on location in the Capitol. Features a great cast: Walter Pidgeon, Charles Lawton, his last film, Peter Lawford, Don Murray. Oh my goodness, the thing is low. Gene Tierney, the Burgess Meredith, of course. You know, it's loaded. And directed, I think I mentioned Otto Preminger directed. And it's very easy to confuse the two because visually they look a lot alike with that black and white. So, you know, remember, Advise and Consent, one film. The Best Man, another film.
And, you know, I should mention that Bob and I had considered many, many other films to talk about tonight. I mean, we could talk about The Manchurian Candidate, many, many other films with political themes that are interesting and can give you more insight into the American political process, especially prior to the 2008 election. We've got another one from the 60s with an incredible script by Rod Serling. You may think of him as the man behind The Twilight Zone, but he wrote a number of incredible scripts in the 1960s, late 1950s. And I think, one thing that we've seen over the past 8 years in American politics are power struggles, actually within the government itself, or shall we say in the case of the Bush administration, the executive branch wielding its power over other branches of government. a great film, 7 Days in May, with an incredible cast, Kirk Douglas, Burt Lancaster. But this is a film about power struggles within our government.
And what's interesting about this film, Jimmy, is it's about, really, it's like with the power struggle, people taking powers beyond what they're allotted. And I think this is a film that should always be revisited, always check in with this, because Rod Serling, under the great direction of John Frankenheimer, we should do a show on him sometime.
Yes.
If we haven't already. I can't recall. But this is an amazing film about an attempted military coup done American style, and how it's ultimately defeated. And the showdown between Burt Lancaster as, the general who's going to basically take over the country, and the president who is unpopular in the polls, played by the wonderful Frederick March. I mean, this is Rod Serling dialogue that just crackles. It's fantastic. And the film is exciting, it's got a lot of tension, and it also has a lot of meat, Jim. It resonates, it stands up well over the years. I mean, it's hard to believe this film is 44 years old, but it is.
Here's a scene from 7 Days in May.
I never discuss politics with my officers, but I do demand the highest confidence. Colonel Broderick is an excellent officer with a fine combat record.
And an interesting travel record, you might add. What, for example, was he doing the other day on a motorboat, cruising around my island at Blue Lake, Maine? And don't tell me that's a figment of my imagination, because I've got him on film. Now, what about the kidnapping and detention of Colonel William Henderson at Dulles Airport early this morning?
I know about that case, Mr. President. Colonel Henderson struck an enlisted man and left his post. He's now being held for disciplinary action.
Incommunicado, you might add, so that he doesn't tell what he knows. And there are the wagering activities of yours, General, particularly a betting pool on the Preakness.
Oh, come now, Mr. President.
Or perhaps more aptly classified, your personal and private code. It covers your plan for the military overthrow of the United States government.
I presume, Mr. President, you're prepared to back up that charge?
I am prepared to brand you for what you are, General. A strutting egoist with a Napoleonic power complex, and an out-and-out traitor. I know you think I'm a weak sister, General, but when it comes to my oath of office, defending the Constitution of the United States...
Nobody has to teach me how to salute a flag.
Somebody has to teach you about the democratic processes that flag represents.
But don't you presume to take on that job, Mr. President, because frankly, you're not qualified. Your course of action in the past year has bordered on criminal negligence. This treaty with the Russians is a violation of any concept of security. You're not a weak sister, Mr. President. You're a criminally weak sister. And if you want to talk about your oath of office, I'm here to tell you face to face, President Lyman, that you violated that oath when you stripped this country of its muscles, when you deliberately played upon the fear and fatigue of the people and told them they could remove that fear by the stroke of a pen. And then when this nation rejected you, lost its faith in you, and began militantly to oppose you, you violated that oath by simply not resigning from office and turning this country over to someone who could represent the people of the United States.
And that would be General James Mattoon Scott, wouldn't it? I don't know whether to laugh at that kind of megalomania or simply cry.
James Mattoon Scott, as you put it, hasn't the slightest interest in his own glorification. But he does have an abiding concern about the survival of this country.
Then, by God, run for office!
That is from 7 Days in May, that great, as you called it, crackling dialogue from Rod Serling. And there's a film about our country's checks and balances and that balance of power that must be maintained. And this film really goes for the jugular with that power struggle. It's a great film. Frederick March and Burt Lancaster in that scene from 7 Days in May.
1964, very good year for political movies.
Well, there's so much more we could have talked about, but one thing we can say, get out and vote tomorrow in the 2008 election, and Bob and I, great pleasure in discussing some of these films that are definitely worth revisiting, perhaps one of the cappers on this campaign season. And thanks for listening.
We're really glad to be back with you all here on Take Two, and please catch us here next Monday for another exciting edition of Take Two.